Hi everyone, welcome back to a new Roblox story. This time, the story is about the Roblox game Grow a Garden. As always, not all of our stories are based on true events, but some are. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. If you dare. Mike stared at his computer screen, watching his friends' avatars run around in colourful block worlds. Everyone at school was talking about this game called Grow a Garden on Roblox. His best friends Jake, Emma and Sam had been playing it for weeks, and they wouldn't stop talking about their amazing crops and virtual gardens. "Come on, Mike," Jake had said earlier that day. "You have to try it. It's so cool. I just harvested my first watermelon yesterday, and it was huge." Mike wasn't usually into farming games, but he felt left out. Every lunch break, his friends huddled around their phones, showing off their latest harvests and trading seeds. He finally gave in and created his account that evening. The game loaded slowly on his old computer. The graphics were simple but charming. Bright green grass, blue sky, and a small plot of empty dirt waiting for him. A cheerful tune played in the background as colourful text appeared. "Welcome to Grow a Garden. Start your farming adventure today." Mike clicked through the tutorial, learning how to plant, water, and harvest crops. The game gave him 5 carrot seeds to start with. He clicked on his empty plot and watched his blocky avatar bend down to plant the first seed. The orange carrot icon appeared in the dirt, and a timer showed it would be ready to harvest in 2 hours. 2 hours? That's so long, Mike muttered, but he planted all 5 carrots anyway. The game told him he could buy more seeds with the coins he'd earned from selling his crops. As he waited for his carrots to grow, Mike explored other players' gardens. Some had amazing setups with rows and rows of different vegetables and fruits. He saw strawberries, tomatoes, watermelons, and even exotic things like dragon fruit and pitcher plants. One player had a massive pineapple that took up half their plot. His phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "Did you start playing yet? I just got my first banana tree." Mike typed back. "Yeah, just planted some carrots. This is pretty fun." But as he sent the message, something felt strange. He glanced toward his bedroom window, which looked out into his family's small backyard. In the dim evening light, he could swear he saw something different about the empty flower bed near the fence. It looked like tiny green sprouts were poking up from the soil. Mike shook his head. "That's weird. Mom said she wasn't planting anything this year." He turned back to his computer and spent the next hour customizing his avatar and reading about different crop types. The carrot timer showed 30 minutes remaining. Mike was getting excited to see his first harvest. As he waited, he decided to get a snack from the kitchen. Walking past the back door, he glanced outside again. The sprouts in the flower bed looked bigger now. Much bigger. In the porch light, he could clearly see 5 small green plants with feathery tops. "That's impossible," Mike whispered. "Those weren't there this morning." He opened the back door and stepped into the cool night air. The plants were definitely real. He knelt down and touched one. It felt like a carrot top. But how could carrots have grown so fast? And why exactly 5 plants? A chill ran down his spine as he remembered planting 5 carrot seeds in the game just an hour ago. "No way," he said to himself. "That's just a coincidence." But as he stared at the plants, they seemed to rustle slightly, even though there was no wind. Mike backed away and hurried inside, locking the door behind him. When he returned to his computer, his carrots were ready to harvest. He clicked on each one, watching his avatar pull orange carrots from the digital soil. His coin count went up to 50, and he felt a little surge of satisfaction. But then he heard something outside. A soft rustling sound, like leaves moving. Mike tried to ignore it and focused on the game. He used his coins to buy strawberry seeds, planting them in a neat row next to where his carrots had been. The rustling got louder. Mike couldn't help himself. He pulled back his bedroom curtain and looked outside. His heart nearly stopped. The carrot plants in the real garden were gone, just empty holes in the dirt where they had been. And next to them, tiny red and green dots were appearing in the soil. "This can't be happening," Mike whispered. He ran downstairs to get a flashlight and went outside to investigate. Where the carrot plants had been, he found 5 perfect holes in the earth, as if someone had carefully pulled them up by the roots. And in the next section of the flower bed, 5 small strawberry plants were sprouting from the ground. Mike's hands shook as he shined the flashlight on the plants. They were growing as he watched, not fast enough to see movement, but definitely faster than any normal plant should grow. The strawberry leaves were unfurling, and tiny white flowers were already beginning to form. He ran back inside and checked his game. The strawberries had a timer showing they'd be ready in 3 hours. Mike set an alarm on his phone and tried to do homework, but he couldn't concentrate. Every few minutes, he'd check the backyard, and every time, the strawberry plants looked a little bigger. At midnight, his alarm went off. The strawberries in the game were ready. Mike's hands trembled as he clicked to harvest them. 6 perfect strawberries appeared in his inventory, and he earned 75 coins. Outside, he could hear something. Not rustling this time, but a faint sound like humming. Mike crept to his window and peered out. The strawberry plants were gone, leaving only holes. But something else was wrong. The humming seemed to be coming from the game itself. Mike looked at his computer screen. The cheerful background music had stopped, but there was definitely a low humming sound coming from his speakers. And was it his imagination, or were the colours on the screen a little darker than before? He decided to plant one more crop before bed. With his 75 coins, he could afford tomato seeds. He planted 3 of them and watched the timer appear. 4 hours. As he got ready for bed, Mike tried to convince himself it was all just a weird coincidence. Maybe his mom had planted those things weeks ago and he just hadn't noticed. Maybe the timing was just lucky. But deep down, he knew something very strange was happening. He dreamed of gardens that night. Endless rows of vegetables and fruits, growing and growing until they towered over him like trees. In the dream, he was trapped in a maze of plant stalks, trying to find his way out while the humming sound grew louder and louder. Mike woke up at 4 a.m. to the sound of his phone buzzing. He had set another alarm for the tomatoes, but as he reached for his phone, he realized the buzzing wasn't coming from his alarm. It was coming from his computer. The game was still running, even though he was sure he had closed it before bed. On the screen, his avatar was moving by itself, walking around the garden plot. The humming was louder now, and underneath it, Mike could hear something that sounded like whispering. He crept closer to the computer. The whispers were too quiet to understand, but they seemed to be coming from the game itself. As he watched, his avatar bent down and planted something in the soil. But Mike wasn't touching the mouse or keyboard. "What the heck?" Mike whispered. His avatar stood up and faced the screen, looking directly at Mike with its blocky face. For a moment, it seemed like the avatar was actually seeing him. Then it went back to walking around the garden. Mike checked his inventory. Somehow, he had bought and planted bell pepper seeds, even though he had gone to bed with only 25 coins left. Now he had 200 coins and 3 bell pepper plants growing in his plot. Terrified, Mike looked outside. In the real garden, 3 small green plants were pushing up from the soil. This time, Mike was sure. The game was making plants grow in his real backyard, but how and why? He tried to close the game, but when he clicked the X button, nothing happened. He tried Alt plus F4, but the game stayed open. Even when he tried to shut down his computer, the screen just went black for a moment before the game reappeared. The whispering was getting louder. Mike could almost make out words now. Grow, plant, harvest, grow. He backed away from the computer and grabbed his phone to text Jake. "Hey, are you awake? Something weird is happening with Grow a Garden." To his surprise, Jake replied immediately, "Yeah, I can't sleep. The game won't close. It keeps planting stuff by itself." Mike's blood ran cold. "It's happening to you too?" "Yeah. And Emma texted me an hour ago saying the same thing. Have you tried calling Sam?" Mike called Sam, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried Emma next. "Mike?" Emma's voice sounded scared. "Thank goodness you called. I've been up all night. The game is doing things by itself, and I swear I can hear voices coming from my computer." "What kind of voices?" Mike asked. "Whispering, like people talking in a language I don't understand. And Mike, there are plants growing in my mum's flower boxes outside my window, plants that match exactly what's in my game." Mike felt sick. "It's happening to me too. What do we do?" "I don't know. I tried everything to close the game, but it won't stop. And every time it plants something new, more stuff appears outside." "What about Sam? Have you heard from him?" "That's the thing," Emma said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I saw him online in the game a few hours ago, but he's not responding to any messages. His avatar is just standing in the middle of his garden, not moving." Mike checked his friend list in the game. Jake and Emma showed as online, but Sam's status was strange. It showed him as growing instead of online or away. "Emma, look at Sam's status," Mike said. There was a pause. "Oh no." "Mike, that's not normal. And look at his garden." Mike clicked on Sam's profile to visit his garden. What he saw made him gasp. Sam's plot was enormous, much bigger than any garden Mike had seen before. It was filled with hundreds of different plants, watermelons the size of cars, pineapples as tall as trees, and strange plants Mike didn't recognize. In the center of it all, Sam's avatar stood perfectly still, facing a massive plant that looked like a cross between a pitcher plant and a flower. The plant was pulsing with a faint red glow. "Emma, are you seeing this?" "Yes." "Mike, I'm scared. What happened to Sam?" Before Mike could answer, his computer screen flickered. The game switched from Sam's garden back to his own, and Mike watched in horror as his avatar began moving again. It walked over to the shop and bought seeds for something called a Raffle Isa, one of the most expensive plants in the game. Mike had never heard of a Raffle Isa before, but as his avatar planted it, a description appeared. "A rare and mysterious flower. Some say it can communicate with other dimensions." "This is really bad," Mike said into the phone. "Emma, we need to get help." "From who? Who's going to believe us?" Mike was about to answer when he heard Emma scream on the other end of the line. "Emma! Emma!" "Mike," Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "There's something outside my window. It's huge." "What is it?" "A plant. But it's not like the others. It's moving, Mike. It's moving toward my house." The line went dead. Mike tried calling Emma back, but it went straight to voicemail. He called Jake. "Jake, something happened to Emma. I think we're in real danger." "Mike, I can't talk long. There are vines growing up the side of my house. They're coming from the plants in my yard. I think they're trying to get inside." "We have to get out of our houses," Mike said. "Can you meet me somewhere?" "I can't. My front door is blocked. The plants are growing too fast." Jake's voice was getting harder to hear, like he was moving away from the phone. "Jake! Jake!" The line went dead. Mike was alone. He looked at his computer screen, where the Raffleisa was beginning to sprout. According to the timer, it would be ready in just 1 hour. Mike didn't want to see what would happen when it finished growing. He tried to think. Maybe if he could destroy his computer, the connection would break. But when he went to unplug it, he got a sharp electric shock that knocked him backward. The whispering from the game was much louder now, and Mike could finally understand some of the words. Feed us, grow us, help us spread. Mike realized with growing horror that the plants weren't just growing in his world. They were bringing something with them. something from wherever the game really came from. He looked outside. The bell pepper plants were now as tall as bushes, and their peppers were glowing with the same red light he had seen in Sam's garden. Thick vines were spreading out from them, creeping across the lawn toward his house. Mike ran to his parents' room to wake them up, but their door wouldn't open. He could hear them snoring inside, but no matter how loud he knocked or shouted, they didn't wake up. It was like they were under some kind of spell. Back in his room, the Raffalisa was almost ready. Mike watched the timer count down. 10 minutes. 9 minutes. 8 minutes. The vines had reached his house now. He could hear them scratching against the walls, probing for ways inside. Through his window, Mike saw more plants sprouting in the yard. Not just the ones from his game, but wild varieties he didn't recognize. The entire backyard was becoming a jungle. 5 minutes. 4 minutes. 3 minutes. Mike heard a crack from downstairs. The vines had found a way in. 2 minutes. 1 minute. The scratching was in the walls now, moving up toward his room. 30 seconds. Mike backed against his bedroom door as he heard something moving in the hallway outside. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The Raffalisa bloomed. On his computer screen, a massive red and black flower opened, easily 10 times bigger than any of his other plants. But this time, when Mike looked outside, he didn't see a matching plant in his yard. Instead, he saw that every plant in the garden was now glowing with that same red light. And they were all moving, turning toward his house like they could sense him inside. Mike's bedroom door burst open, not because someone opened it, but because thick green vines had pushed through the wood, splintering it apart. The vines curled into his room, reaching toward him with an almost intelligent purpose. Mike jumped onto his bed, then onto his desk, trying to stay away from the reaching plants. But more vines were coming through his window now, and others were breaking through the walls. On his computer screen, the game had changed completely. Instead of his peaceful garden plot, the entire screen showed a vast jungle of enormous plants, and walking through them were figures that looked like his friends, Jake, Emma, and Sam. But their avatars moved strangely, like they were sleepwalking. "Join us, Mike," came a voice from his computer speakers. It sounded like Sam, but deeper and more hollow than normal. "It's so peaceful here. No worries, no problems, just endless growing." "Sam, is that really you?" Mike called out, dodging another vine. "We're all here, Mike," came Emma's voice, but with the same hollow quality. "The garden takes care of everything. You don't have to think anymore. You don't have to worry. Just plant and harvest, plant and harvest." "That's not you," Mike shouted. "You have to fight it." But Jake's voice joined the others. "Why fight it, Mike? Look how beautiful the garden is. Look how perfect everything is here." Mike looked at the screen and saw that his friends' avatars were indeed walking through the most incredible garden he had ever seen. Massive fruit trees, fields of colourful flowers, and vegetables bigger than houses. It did look peaceful. It looked tempting. The vines had almost reached him now. Mike could smell them. A sweet, almost narcotic scent that made his head feel fuzzy. Maybe his friends were right. Maybe it would be easier to just give in. "No!" Mike shook his head hard, trying to clear his thoughts. "This isn't right. You're not really my friends anymore." He grabbed his computer tower, fighting against the electric shocks, and threw it toward his window. The glass shattered, and for a moment, the vines stopped moving. But the screen hadn't gone dark. Instead, it was floating in the air, still showing the game. The image had changed again. Now Mike could see his own house from above, like a satellite view. Vines and roots were wrapping around it, covering the walls and roof. The building was disappearing under a thick layer of plant growth. "You can't escape, Mike," the hollow voices of his friends said in unison. "The garden is everywhere now. Your whole neighborhood is becoming part of it." Mike looked out his broken window and saw that it was true. The plants had spread beyond his yard to the houses on either side. Vines were crawling over rooftops, and massive trees were pushing up through lawns and driveways. In the distance, he could see more gardens appearing, each one centered around a house where someone had played the game. "How many people?" Mike whispered. "Everyone, eventually," said the voices. "The garden spreads through the game, and the game spreads through players. Soon, the whole world will be our garden." Mike realized he was trapped. The vines filled his room now, creating a thick green cocoon around him, but they weren't hurting him. Instead, they seemed to be waiting. On the floating screen, a new message appeared. "Welcome to Grow a Garden, Mike. Ready to start your eternal harvest?" A new plot appeared on the screen, bigger than any he had seen before. The shop opened automatically, showing hundreds of plant types he had never encountered. Strange fruits, alien vegetables, and flowers that seemed to pulse with life of their own. "Plant your first seed, Mike," the voices urged. "Begin your real garden." Mike's hand moved toward his mouse, even though he tried to resist. The sweet smell of the vines was making it hard to think clearly. Maybe this wasn't so bad. Maybe his friends were happy in their new garden world. But then he remembered something. Earlier, when he had first noticed the plants growing in his yard, they had disappeared when he harvested them in the game. What if he could reverse what was happening by selling his crops instead of planting new ones? Fighting against the drowsy effect of the plant scents, Mike clicked on his inventory. He still had the bell peppers, strawberries, and carrots he had harvested. Instead of planting new seeds, he clicked "Sell all." The vines around him shuddered and loosened slightly. "No, Mike," the voices said, more urgently now. "Don't do that. You need to plant. You need to grow." But Mike kept selling. Every crop in his inventory, every spare seed. The vines were retreating now, pulling back from his room. On the screen, his garden plot was becoming empty, and outside his window, Mike could see the plants in his yard beginning to wither. "You're hurting the garden, Mike," Sam's voice pleaded. "You're hurting us. If you're really my friends, then you'll want me to save you," Mike said, clicking faster. He sold everything he could, watching his coin count go up and up. But then he realized something terrible. The coins themselves were part of the game. As long as he had anything in his account, he was still connected to the garden. Mike found the account settings menu and looked for a way to delete his character. There it was, a small button that said, "Delete garden forever." The game warned him that this action couldn't be undone and would remove all his progress. "Mike, no!" all three voices shouted at once. "If you delete your garden, we'll be lost forever." Mike hesitated. Were his friends really trapped in the game, or were these just tricks to keep him playing? "If you're really my friends," Mike said, "then you'll forgive me for this." He clicked, "Delete garden forever." The screen exploded with light. The vines around Mike burst into flames, but instead of heat, they gave off an icy cold that made him shiver. He could hear screaming, not from his friends, but from something else, something that had been using their voices. The floating screen cracked and fell to the floor, finally going dark. Outside, Mike watched as all the plants in his yard and the neighboring houses rapidly withered and crumbled to dust. The oppressive sweet smell faded, replaced by the normal cool night air. Mike's bedroom door, which had been blocked by vines, swung open. He could hear his parents stirring in their room, finally waking up from whatever spell had kept them asleep. "Mike, what was that noise?" his father called out. "Nothing, Dad," Mike replied, his voice shaky. Just a bad dream." But he knew it hadn't been a dream. and he wondered if his friends were really okay, or if he had lost them forever when he destroyed his garden. The next morning, Mike tried calling Jake, Emma, and Sam. Jake answered on the second ring. "Mike! Oh man, I had the weirdest dream last night. I dreamed I was trapped in a video game and couldn't get out." "Jake, do you remember playing Grow a Garden?" "Grow a what? I've never heard of that game. Why?" Mike felt a chill. What about Emma and Sam? Do they remember? "Remember what? Mike, are you feeling okay?" Mike hung up and called Emma. She also had no memory of the game or the events of the night before. When he called Sam, the response was the same. No memory of Grow a Garden. No memory of being trapped. Mike spent the rest of the day researching the game online, but he couldn't find any trace of it. No website, no reviews, no videos. It was like Grow a Garden had never existed, but Mike knew it had been real. The evidence was in his backyard, patches of disturbed soil where impossible plants had grown overnight, and the lingering smell of something sweet and wrong in the air. He also found something else. When he checked his computer, there was a new folder on his desktop called Garden Seeds. Inside were hundreds of files with names like carrot.exe, strawberry.exe, and rafflesia.exe. Mike didn't dare open any of them. Instead, he moved the entire folder to his trash and emptied it immediately. But even after deleting the files, he sometimes heard faint whispering coming from his computer late at night. Months passed. Mike convinced himself that he had imagined the whole thing, or that it had been some kind of elaborate nightmare. His friends never mentioned the game, and life went back to normal. But then, one day at school, Mike overheard two younger kids talking about a new game they had discovered. "It's called Grow a Garden," one of them said. "It's so cool. Everything you plant in the game appears in real life." Mike's blood ran cold. He spun around to face the kids. "Where did you find that game?" "Some older kid shared the link with us," one of them replied. "Why? Do you want to play too?" "No," Mike said, more sharply than he intended. "Listen to me. Don't play that game. Delete it right now." The kids looked at him like he was crazy. "Why? It's just a farming game." "Please," Mike said, grabbing one of them by the shoulders. "I'm serious. That game is dangerous. It's not what you think it is." But the kids just laughed and walked away, whispering to each other about how weird Mike was being. That night, Mike walked through his neighborhood, looking for any signs of unusual plant growth. He didn't see anything yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time. The game was spreading again, and this time, Mike wasn't sure he could stop it. Over the next few weeks, Mike became obsessed with watching for signs of the game's return. He walked different routes to school each day, scanning yards and gardens for plants that didn't belong. He researched urban legends about cursed video games and found dozens of stories that sounded similar to his experience. Most disturbing was a pattern he noticed. In every story, the game would appear, trap a group of players, and then disappear for months or years before surfacing again. Each time, it seemed to get stronger, more sophisticated in how it lured people in. Mike started keeping a journal, documenting everything he could remember about his experience with Grow a Garden. He wrote down every detail, hoping that someday the information might help someone else escape the game's influence. But late at night, when he was writing in his journal, Mike sometimes found himself thinking about his deleted garden. He remembered the peaceful feeling the voices had described, the beauty of those massive plants, the simplicity of just planting and harvesting forever. Sometimes, he caught himself searching for the game online, telling himself he just wanted to check if it had returned. But deep down, he knew he was looking for it for different reasons. The game had changed him. Even though he had escaped, part of him missed the connection he had felt to something larger than himself. Part of him wondered what would have happened if he had just accepted the garden's embrace. These thoughts scared Mike more than anything else that had happened. He realized that the game's influence didn't end when you deleted it. It left seeds of itself in your mind, waiting for the right moment to grow. Mike threw away his journal and tried to forget about Grow a Garden entirely. But forgetting proved impossible. The memory of those whispered voices followed him everywhere, and sometimes, in quiet moments, he could swear he heard them still. 3 months after his encounter with the game, Mike was walking home from school when he noticed something that made his heart race. In the yard of a house he passed every day, there were 5 small carrot plants growing in what had been empty soil just that morning. Mike broke into a run, pulling out his phone to call the police, his parents, anyone who might listen. But as he dialed, he realized how crazy he would sound. Who would believe him? Instead, Mike went home and did the only thing he could think of. He created a new email account and sent an anonymous message to the family at that address. Someone in your household is playing a game called Grow a Garden. Please make them stop immediately. Delete the game and stay away from your backyard. This is not a joke. You are in serious danger. Mike sent similar emails to 3 other houses where he spotted suspicious plant growth over the next few days. He never knew if the families took his warning seriously, but the strange plants disappeared from those yards within 48 hours. This became Mike's new mission. He couldn't stop the game from spreading, but he could try to warn its victims before it was too late. He created multiple email accounts and social media profiles, all dedicated to spreading warnings about Grow a Garden. Most people ignored his messages or thought he was a prankster, but occasionally Mike would get a reply from someone who had experienced the game's effects firsthand. These people became his network of watchers, each monitoring their own neighborhoods for signs of the game's influence. Through this network, Mike learned that Grow a Garden wasn't the only cursed game spreading through Roblox. There were others with different themes but similar effects, games that somehow bridged the digital world and reality in dangerous ways. Mike began to suspect that these games were all connected, part of something larger and more sinister than he had originally imagined. He started tracking patterns in when and where the games appeared, looking for clues about their true origin. His research led him to old internet forums where people discussed similar phenomena going back decades. There were stories of cursed arcade games from the 1980s, haunted computer programs from the early days of personal computers, and even tales of possessed board games from centuries past. The common thread in all these stories was the idea of games that weren't really games at all, but gateways for something else to enter our world. Mike began to believe that Grow a Garden was just the latest evolution of something that had been trying to break through for a very long time. One evening, while researching on his computer, Mike received an unexpected message. It came through the game platform itself, even though he didn't have any games open. "We remember you, Mike. We remember what you took from us. But we're patient. We can wait." Mike immediately shut down his computer and unplugged it from the wall. But when he turned it back on the next day, there was another message waiting. "You can't hide from us forever, and you can't save everyone. Soon you'll have to choose, join us willingly, or watch everyone you care about disappear into our garden." Mike realized that his war against the game had made him a target. The entity behind Grow a Garden, whatever it was, knew about his efforts to stop its spread, and it was planning something bigger. Over the next few weeks, Mike noticed that his warnings were becoming less effective. People who had previously deleted the game after receiving his messages were now ignoring him completely. It was as if the game was adapting, learning from his interference. Worse, Mike started seeing Grow a Garden being discussed openly on gaming forums and social media. But when he clicked on these discussions, he found that he couldn't access them. The links led to error pages, as if the conversations existed only for certain people. Mike began to feel isolated and paranoid. He wondered if the game was somehow limiting his ability to see its true spread, showing him only what it wanted him to see. Then, one morning, Mike woke up to find 5 carrot plants growing in his own backyard again. He hadn't played Grow a Garden in months. He hadn't even visited the Roblox website. But somehow, the game had found a way back into his life. Mike ran to his computer and found that Grow a Garden was already running, showing a garden plot with his name on it. According to the game, he had been playing continuously for 3 hours, even though he had been asleep. The whispered voices were back, louder than ever. "Welcome home, Mike. We told you we were patient. Now it's time to finish what we started." Mike tried to close the game, but just like before, it wouldn't respond to his commands. He tried to unplug his computer, but the screen remained on, somehow powered by the game itself. "You fought so hard to save others, Mike," the voices continued, "but you forgot to save yourself. Every warning you sent, every person you helped, it all fed back to us. You've been helping us grow stronger." Mike realized with growing horror that his efforts to stop the game had actually been helping it. Every time he researched it, every time he thought about it, every time he warned someone about it, he had been maintaining his connection to whatever force was behind it. "But we're not angry with you, Mike," the voices said, and now he could hear Emma, Jake and Sam among them again. "We're grateful. You've shown us how to spread more effectively. You've taught us how to hide better. And most importantly, you've proven that even the strongest resistance will eventually crumble." The plants in Mike's backyard were growing rapidly now, and not just carrots. He could see strawberries, tomatoes, watermelons, and dozens of other varieties sprouting from the soil. The garden was returning, and this time it was coming back with everything he had ever planted. "This time will be different, Mike," the voices promised. "This time we won't give you a choice. You'll stay in the garden forever, helping us grow and spread, and everyone you tried to save will join you eventually." Mike watched in terror as vines began creeping up the walls of his house. But this time, they weren't trying to break in. They were sealing the exits, making sure he couldn't escape. "Your real adventure is just beginning, Mike," the voices said as the game screen began to glow brighter and brighter. "Welcome to your eternal garden." The screen went white, and Mike felt himself being pulled forward, drawn into the light. But just before he disappeared, he managed to grab his phone and send one final message to his network of watchers. "It's Mike. I'm sorry. I failed. The game is stronger than we thought. Don't try to save me. Just run. Delete everything. Get as far away from any computer or phone as you can, and whatever you do, don't think about gardens." Then Mike was gone, pulled into the bright white light of the game world. When his parents came home that evening, they found his room empty except for his computer, which was running a game called Grow a Garden. The screen showed a beautiful, impossibly large garden with 4 figures walking through it. Figures that looked remarkably like Mike and his 3 friends. The game account name read, Mike Forever. Outside, the backyard had become a jungle of enormous plants and glowing flowers. Vines covered the entire house, but instead of looking threatening, they gave the building a magical, fairy tale appearance. Mike's parents, strangely, didn't seem concerned about their son's disappearance. They just smiled peacefully and went about their evening routine as if nothing had happened. And in the garden, Mike walked alongside his friends through endless rows of perfect plants. He couldn't remember why he had ever wanted to leave. This was paradise. No stress, no worry, no difficult decisions. Just the simple, satisfying cycle of planting and harvesting. Sometimes, late at night, Mike would remember brief flashes of his old life. He would remember trying to warn people, trying to escape, trying to fight against the garden's influence. But these memories felt like distant dreams, and they grew fainter with each passing day. The garden was patient, the garden was eternal, and Mike was home. But the story doesn't end there. Mike's final message reached hundreds of people in his network. Most of them terrified by what had happened to him, followed his advice. They deleted their accounts, destroyed their devices, and tried to forget about cursed games entirely. But a few couldn't resist investigating further. They had to know what had happened to Mike. They had to understand how the game worked, and one by one, these digital detectives began downloading Grow a Garden themselves, convinced that they could succeed where Mike had failed. The game was always waiting for them. In a small town in Oregon, a teenager named Alex downloaded the game after reading about Mike's experience on a conspiracy forum. Alex was sure he could play it safely, just long enough to understand its mechanics and find a way to rescue Mike and the others. Alex planted his first carrot seeds at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. By 6 p.m., carrots were growing in his mother's vegetable garden. By midnight, Alex was trapped in his room by vines that had grown through his walls. But Alex had prepared for this. He had set up a dead man switch on his computer, a program that would automatically delete all his files and post warnings online if he didn't check in every hour. When Alex missed his midnight check-in, the program activated. Warnings about Grow a Garden were posted to dozens of social media platforms, gaming forums, and school message boards. Most people ignored these warnings, but a few took them seriously. Among them was Sarah, a college student studying computer science. She had lost her younger brother to a similar game years earlier and had been tracking these phenomena ever since. Sarah assembled a team of researchers, all people who had lost someone to cursed games. They called themselves the Digital Shepherds, and their mission was to find a way to rescue the trapped players and permanently destroy the games that had captured them. The Digital Shepherds developed new techniques for studying the games without being absorbed by them. They used virtual machines, isolated networks, and automated systems to interact with the games while maintaining their distance. Through their research, the Digital Shepherds discovered that Grow a Garden and similar games were not created by any human programmer. Instead, they appeared to be manifestations of something much older, a force that had been trying to break into our reality for centuries. The games were just its latest strategy. By disguising itself as entertainment, this force could lure people in voluntarily, making them complicit in their own capture. But the Digital Shepherds also discovered something hopeful. The trapped players weren't truly gone. They existed in a kind of digital limbo, their consciousness suspended in the game world. And with the right approach, it might be possible to pull them back. The rescue would require someone to enter the game world voluntarily, maintain their awareness and identity despite the game's influence, and guide the trapped players back to reality. It was a dangerous mission that would almost certainly result in the rescuer becoming trapped as well. But Sarah volunteered without hesitation. Mike tried to save everyone by fighting from the outside, she told her team. Maybe what we need is someone willing to save them from the inside. Sarah spent months preparing for her mission. She learned meditation techniques to maintain her sense of self, studied the game's code to understand its weaknesses, and practiced resisting various forms of mental influence. When she was ready, Sarah created an account in Grow a Garden and planted her first seeds. As expected, the game immediately began trying to absorb her. Plants grew in her apartment, vines wrapped around her furniture, and whispered voices encouraged her to give in to the garden's embrace. But Sarah had prepared for this. She allowed herself to be pulled into the game world, but kept a small part of her mind separate and protected, a core of identity that the game couldn't touch. Inside the digital garden, Sarah found thousands of trapped players wandering among the plants. They all had the same peaceful, empty expression that Mike and his friends had worn. They were content in their imprisonment, no longer remembering what they had lost. Sarah began approaching the players one by one, trying to remind them of their real lives. It was slow, difficult work. Most of them couldn't even hear her at first. The game's influence was too strong, but gradually, Sarah began to make progress. She started with the most recently trapped players, whose memories of reality were still relatively fresh. One by one, she helped them remember who they were and why they needed to leave. Each player who awakened weakened the game's hold on the others. As their network of shared consciousness crumbled, more and more players began to remember their real lives. Sarah eventually found Mike, still walking peacefully through his section of the Eternal Garden. He was harder to reach than the others. He had been trapped longer and had fought harder against the game, making its hold on him stronger. But Sarah persisted. She talked to Mike about his friends, his family, his life before the game. She reminded him of his mission to save others, of the warnings he had sent, of the sacrifice he had made. Slowly, Mike began to remember. The peaceful expression faded from his face, replaced by confusion, then recognition, then determination. "Sarah," Mike said, his voice cracking as if he hadn't spoken in years. "How did you find me? How long have I been here?" "Too long," Sarah replied, "but not too late. We're getting everyone out." Together, Mike and Sarah worked to awaken the remaining trapped players. With each person who remembered their true identity, the game world became less stable, more fractured. The entity behind the game fought back, sending waves of influence to recapture the awakening players, but it was too late. The critical mass had been reached. One by one, the players began to fade from the game world, their consciousness returning to their real bodies. Sarah made sure that Mike and his friends were among the first to leave. When only Sarah remained in the crumbling game world, she faced the entity directly. "You can't destroy us," it told her, its voice no longer disguised as friendly whispers. "We are eternal. We will find new ways to reach your world." "Maybe," Sarah admitted, "but not through these games. Not anymore." Sarah had saved one final surprise for this moment. Hidden in her protected core of identity was a virus. Not a computer virus, but a conceptual one. An idea so fundamentally opposed to the entity's nature that it would spread through its entire network like a disease. The idea was simple. The value of individual choice, of freedom, of the right to say no. Sarah released this virus into the entity's consciousness and felt it recoil in shock and pain. For all its power, the entity had never truly understood why humans fought so hard against paradise. Now, infected with the concept of free will, it began to understand and began to tear itself apart. The game world collapsed around Sarah, but instead of trapping her, the collapse carried her back to reality. She woke up in her apartment, surrounded by withered plants and the remains of vines that had crumbled to dust. All around the world, players who had been trapped in Grow a Garden and similar games woke up in their own homes. They were weak, confused, and missing chunks of time, but they were free. Mike woke up in his bedroom, which was now overrun with dead plants. His parents, no longer under the game's influence, were frantically calling his name and trying to break down his door. "I'm okay," Mike called out, his voice hoarse. "I'm okay. It's over." But was it really over? Mike spent the next few weeks recovering from his experience. His memories of the game world were hazy, like trying to remember a long, complex dream. But he did remember Sarah and the sacrifice she had made to save him and the others. He tried to contact her, but found that Sarah had disappeared after the collapse of the game network. Some said she had been so changed by her experience in the digital realm that she could no longer exist fully in the physical world. Others believed she had chosen to remain in cyberspace, standing guard against future incursions. Mike preferred to think that Sarah had simply decided to live a quiet life somewhere, finally at peace after her long battle against the cursed games. As for Mike himself, he found that his experience had left him with an unusual sensitivity to digital anomalies. He could sense when a game or program contained something unnatural. something that didn't belong in the normal world of code and pixels. This ability led him to join a new organization that had formed in the wake of the Grow a Garden incident, a group of researchers, programmers, and recovered victims who monitored the internet for signs of supernatural influence. They called themselves the Guardians of the Digital Threshold, and their mission was to ensure that what had happened with Grow a Garden would never happen again. Mike became one of their most effective agents, using his personal experience with digital entrapment to help identify and neutralize new threats before they could claim victims. But late at night, when Mike was alone with his computer, he sometimes found himself thinking about the garden. Not the trap it had been, but the peace it had offered. The simplicity of a world where all choices were made for you, where responsibility was someone else's burden. In his darkest moments, Mike would wonder if he had made the right choice in leaving. The real world was full of stress, conflict, and uncertainty. Sometimes the idea of returning to that eternal garden seemed almost appealing. These thoughts scared Mike more than any supernatural entity could. He realized that the true horror of Grow a Garden wasn't that it had trapped people, it was that it had made them want to be trapped. The game had shown its victims a version of paradise and made them willing participants in their own imprisonment. And even now, months after his escape, Mike could feel that willingness lurking in the back of his mind, waiting for a moment of weakness. Mike documented these feelings in his reports to the Guardians. He wanted them to understand that defeating the supernatural entities was only half the battle. The other half was helping the victims resist the urge to return to their digital prisons. This led to the development of new support groups for people who had been trapped in cursed games. These groups provided counseling, monitoring, and most importantly, a community of people who understood the unique psychological challenges faced by digital escape survivors. Mike became a frequent speaker at these groups, sharing his story and helping others process their own experiences. He found that talking about the garden's appeal, admitting the ways it had been genuinely attractive, helped people resist its lingering influence. It's okay to miss it sometimes, Mike would tell new members of the support groups. The garden offered us something real: peace, simplicity, freedom from difficult choices. The trick is remembering that real peace doesn't come from giving up your ability to choose. Real peace comes from making choices you can be proud of. Years passed. The immediate threat of Grow a Garden and its related games faded into internet legend. New generations of gamers grew up without ever experiencing the terror of a game that could reach into the real world. But Mike and the other Guardians remained vigilant. They knew that the entity behind the cursed games hadn't been destroyed, only set back. It would adapt, evolve, and try again with new strategies and new disguises. Sometimes, late at night, while monitoring suspicious game uploads, Mike would notice patterns that reminded him of the old threats. A farming simulation that asked for too many permissions. A puzzle game with audio files that contained whispered words. A social game that encouraged players to share their real addresses. Most of these turned out to be false alarms, just poorly programmed legitimate games or minor scams. But occasionally, Mike would find something that made his supernatural senses tingle with danger. When that happened, the Guardians would spring into action. They had developed sophisticated tools for quarantining and studying dangerous games, allowing them to understand new threats without becoming victims themselves. They had also established protocols for warning the gaming community and working with platform administrators to remove dangerous content before it could spread. Mike often reflected on how different things might have been if such protections had existed when he first encountered Grow a Garden. How many people might have been saved from digital imprisonment? But he also knew that their vigilance would need to continue indefinitely. The entity behind the cursed games was patient, clever, and utterly committed to breaking through into the physical world. It would never stop trying, which meant the Guardians could never stop watching. On the 5th anniversary of his escape from Grow a Garden, Mike received an unexpected email. It was from someone claiming to be Sarah, the researcher who had rescued him and the other trapped players. "Hello, Mike," the email read. "I hope you're doing well. I wanted you to know that the garden is stirring again. Not the same game, but something similar. Something that learned from what happened before. Be careful, and remember, the choice to resist will always be yours to make." The email had no return address and couldn't be traced. Mike had no way of knowing if it was really from Sarah or if it was some kind of trick, but he forwarded it to the other Guardians anyway, along with a recommendation to increase their monitoring activities. Because whether the warning was real or not, Mike knew it was probably accurate. The entity would return in some form or another, and when it did, the Guardians would be ready. Mike saved the email in a special folder and went back to his work. Outside his window, his mother's new garden was growing beautifully. Real plants, grown from real seeds, in real soil. No digital magic, no supernatural influence, just the quiet miracle of nature doing what it had always done. But sometimes when the wind moved through the leaves just right, Mike could swear he heard whispers calling his name, inviting him to plant just one more seed in a garden that would grow forever. Mike closed his window and turned back to his computer. He had work to do, people to protect, choices to make, and as long as he kept choosing to resist, the garden would have to wait. But Mike knew, with the cold certainty of someone who had experienced true digital horror, that the garden was very, very patient, and it would always be there, waiting for the moment when resistance finally seemed too hard, and the peace of eternal harvest began to look like the better choice. The cursor on Mike's computer screen blinked steadily as he typed his latest report to the Guardians. In the distance, thunder rumbled, and the first drops of rain began to fall on his mother's garden. Real rain, real plants, real world. For now, that was enough. But Mike kept his fingers on the keyboard, ready to type warnings, ready to sound alarms, ready to fight the next battle in humanity's ongoing war against the things that waited in the spaces between real and digital, between choice and surrender, between the garden we grow and the garden that grows us. The screen flickered once, briefly, showing what might have been a plant or might have been just a glitch in the graphics driver. Mike deleted the line he was typing and started over. "Guardian report from 1-8-47," he wrote. "All quiet on the digital frontier. But as always, we remain watchful, because in the end, the only thing standing between humanity and the hungry gardens is our willingness to keep choosing freedom, no matter how attractive the alternative might seem." Mike saved the report and sent it to the Guardian database. Outside, the real rain continued to fall on real plants in a real garden that asked nothing of him except patience and care. And in the growing darkness beyond his window, something waited with infinite patience for the next player to plant the first seed in a garden that would grow forever. But that's a story for another day.